How to write your first ever book. So many people have this as a lifetime goal of theirs, but they never manage to get around to actually doing it. Or if they do, they don't really make it out the first few chapters, those first few early stages, either losing motivation or just not knowing where to start. My name is Lily. I've been writing for 15 years, and this is what I would do if I was writing my first book right now. So I've broken my advice down into 6 easy steps that shouldn't be too difficult to follow. And the first step is to brainstorm or find your book idea. Chances are most of you know what story you want to write already. However, I thought I'd give some tips and tricks on finding a story idea in case that's not you, which is absolutely okay, by the way. So for me personally, story ideas just seem to come out of nowhere. So either when I'm on a walk or doing the dishes or watching one of my favorite movies, story ideas just sort of like come to me. But if that's not you, that's not how you come up with story ideas, and these are some things that you can try. Firstly, you can think about the types of books that you want to read. So, is there anything that's missing from the market that you'd be really interested in? Are there any concepts you'd love your favourite author to explore, or anything that's missing from your favourite genre? Or following on from that, you could try mashing 2 completely different genres together or stories together. For example, my next book that I plan on working on, Project Love, that is about Love Island in a fantasy world. So it's like Love Island meets the fantasy genre. You can honestly do this with anything. You could do like, The Wizard of Oz meets The Great Gatsby. Harry Potter meets Stephen King, murder mystery meets the sci-fi genre. You can honestly just like mix anything together and just see what happens if you were to write that book. You could also think about yourself and your life experiences. Is there anything you've gone through that you'd like to see represented in a book? Maybe you want to write a story that could be useful to someone who is going through what you once went through now. Once you have your story idea, I recommend grabbing a notebook and then writing down absolutely everything that excites you about it. What ideas are immediately coming to mind? Are there any scenes that are coming to you? Any world building, any particular characters, outfits, moments you can see happening in your story, maybe a final battle scene or a first kiss scene. Absolutely just anything that comes to you about your story idea, write it down in a notebook and just see what happens. You can then use these ideas that you've brainstormed to create your plot and your characters slightly later. If you find that writing a notebook isn't really doing anything for you, you can also go on Pinterest and have a look at images and artwork and photographs and see if that sparks any story ideas. You can also create Spotify playlists or maybe do some map making and see if that excites you and comes up with anything you could put into your story at a later date. Step number 2 is to flesh your story out, firstly by thinking about characters. Now, your characters are really the heart of the story, so I would say that out of all the steps here, this is probably the most important step. So who is the protagonist of your story? You don't need to know everything about them before you start writing your book. I personally get to know them whilst I'm drafting and whilst I'm writing. However, these are some things that you should probably be thinking about before you start putting words onto the page. Firstly, what does your character want? What is the motive, the desire that drives every single action that they take throughout the course of your story? So, for example, in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy wants to go home. So, everything she does throughout the story is driving her towards that goal, towards that desire to go home. Secondly, every single character needs to have a misbelief. This is something they think about the world, about life, about themselves that is wrong, and it's preventing them from getting what they want. It's preventing them from finding success, from being able to get what they need in life. It's the internal conflict that will follow them throughout the course of the entire story. If we take Pride and Prejudice as an example, Elizabeth Bennet must overcome her prejudice of others, specifically Mr. Darcy, in order for her to find love, in order for her to marry Mr. Darcy. And equally, Mr. Darcy must overcome his pride, thinking that the Bennets are beneath him, in order for him to find love and for him to be able to marry Miss Bennet. So think about what misbelief or internal conflict is stopping your character from getting what they want. So, for example, if they really want to be loved, perhaps they have a belief that they're unworthy of love, and that misbelief is what's stopping them from getting what they want. And that is the internal conflict that's going to follow them throughout the course of the story, and eventually they must learn the lesson that what they believe is actually a misbelief in order for them to have, the happy ending, the happily ever after, assuming you're writing a story with a happy ending. And obviously in a sad story, they probably wouldn't learn that misbelief is a misbelief, or they'd learn it a bit too late if you're writing something with a sad ending instead. Our third step is plot. So, what happens in your story? Here, you really want to be learning about the basics of the 3-act story structure. Pretty much every story can be split up into 3 sections. So, Act 1, this is the setup. This is where all the main characters are introduced. This is where the conflict is introduced. And pretty early on, we learn about our protagonist, their want, and their misbelief that will be following them throughout the course of the story. Act 2, the middle of the book, this is where we see the characters trying and failing to get what they want. This is where the concept of your story idea is really playing out, so essentially the promise of the premise. So if the selling point of your story is that characters are going to be going on this epic fantasy quest, and that's what you were brainstorming, that's the idea that you were brainstorming earlier, this is where we'll see those characters going on that epic fantasy quest. Act 3 is the final battle, either literally or figuratively. This is where your protagonist will fight the villain and overcome their obstacles, maybe defeating the bad guy in a battle or confronting someone in a conversation, standing up to a bully, that sort of thing. This is also where your protagonist is going to be crushing their internal obstacle and replacing their misbelief with the correct belief. I really recommend reading Save the Cat Writes a Novel to figure out how to put all of your story ideas into a chapter by chapter outline, like the one I've got behind me right now. The sticky notes all represent different chapters in my current book. You don't need to know absolutely everything that happens in your book scene by scene. It is okay to come up with ideas as you're drafting, especially if you're more of a pantser than a plotter like I am. I much prefer to pants my early drafts, basically meaning that I go into my book with very few ideas. This does vary from person to person. Also depends on how many ideas you want going in. You could be more of a pantser and be in the middle of a plotter and a pantser. It's completely up to you and how you write. So don't stress too much about knowing absolutely everything, especially if you are writing your first ever book and you don't know what works for you in terms of plotting and outlining just yet. But I do recommend getting the main plot points down. So maybe just getting a decent idea of what's going to happen in the start, middle, and end. So you've got an overall structure that you can fill in as you go along. Step number 4 is the exciting step, and that is to start writing. As I've just said, the amount of prep you need to do to get to this stage and to feel comfortable drafting entirely depends on you. However, people can fall into the trap of over prepping and over preparing to write their book. They get stuck in the perpetual, plotting stage. They fill out countless numbers of character profile templates, and in the end, they just never start writing their book. Or if they do, they don't get very far because they're so anxious and terrified. So if this sounds like you, definitely just drop everything, drop the preparation, and just start writing now. A big reason as to people don't write as soon as they should is because they're anxious about writing something that's bad. However, I can promise you with so much certainty that your first book, or rather your first draft, is definitely going to be bad. It's going to be horrendous. It's going to be nothing like the big, beautiful story idea that you have in your head, and that is absolutely okay. Absolutely everyone, including your favorite author, writes terrible first drafts, and they probably wrote a terrible first book that will never see the light of day, and that is absolutely okay. It does not mean that you're a bad writer. So just embrace the terrible writing, embrace the cringe, just start drafting as soon as you can, try to get to the end, and then you can write it again better in the future. Step number 5 is to find inspiration to write and keep going. As I just said, a lot of people can finish the prep, they can write the first couple of chapters, but they very rarely actually reach the end. This is why it is so important to find out what inspires you to write, so you have things that you can lean on to keep you going when you're struggling to continue. You almost want to create a sort of writing motivation survival kit. Now, this is going to be different for everyone, but this is what I would consider when figuring out what motivates me to write. Firstly, do you have any career goals when it comes to writing? Do you have any writing moments that you want to experience? For example, for me, I really wanted to print out my manuscript in full. And that's something that motivated me to continue writing. Basically, is there anything that writing can give you, any experience, any moment, like being a published author, going on a book tour, being able to hold your printed manuscript in your hand? What do you want from the experience of finishing your book? And if you have anything, I recommend maybe finding some images that represent that for you. So, for example, I had those images of printed out manuscripts, and that really genuinely, honestly, looking at those images motivated me to continue writing. I added it to a vision board that I made on Pinterest, and I compiled all those Pinterest images to create a desktop vision board that I looked at every single day. And that helped me to continue going. So the images included printed out manuscripts, like I just said. It included images of authors at book signings or authors going to see all their books getting printed out at a factory, images like that. Secondly, think about times when you've been excited to write a book. What were you doing in those moments? Were you watching AuthorTube videos? Were you watching a movie, reading a book that you love? Were you listening to your favorite author on like an interview podcast? Like, what were you doing? It might be useful to keep a list of these activities that excited you somewhere, so you have some ideas or inspiration of things that you can do to re-excite yourself when times get tough. So, for example, for me, I have a playlist of loads of author interviews I absolutely love and really inspire me and excite me and make me want to work on my manuscript. Thirdly, try and make writing fun again and mix things up. Maybe write with some other people, maybe do writing challenges, do a 10K word day, or try writing at 5 a.m. or at midnight, a different time of day. Go to a different location, maybe write in a coffee shop, a library, just like mix things up and make things fun. Maybe you could reward yourself for every single milestone that you hit. So maybe when you reach 5K, you'll buy yourself something. When you hit 50K, 100K, go out and do something nice for yourself. Just do something different and exciting. Lastly, I suggest creating a library of mini reference books. These can be books that either you really like the prose or books that are like quite similar to the book that you're writing. So books that you can pick up and read when you're going through writer's book. So basically books that really inspire you, that you really enjoy, books that you would like to write something quite similar to. I find that sometimes reading is the best remedy to not being able to write. This is just something that gets my creative juices flowing. Maybe it'll work for you, maybe it won't, but I think it's definitely worth a try. That is everything I have to say today. I hope it was helpful. Obviously, I appreciate that I can't go into loads of information and loads of detail about every single step in this one video. However, I do hope to do that for each step in the future. Anyway, I wish you all the best of luck with writing your first ever book. This is a super exciting time and I'm super jealous of you. I hope you have an amazing day and we'll talk to you very soon. Bye.